Vancouver looks like paradise, but scientists warn a hidden volcanic system nearby could shut down the entire region in just hours. Every day, nearly 4 million people in the Vancouver region live beneath mountains that scientists consider part of an active volcanic system, and most of them have absolutely no idea. On the surface, the city looks untouchable. Glass skyscrapers reflect the Pacific Ocean, while snow-covered peaks surround the skyline like a postcard from another world. Tourists come here searching for beauty. Locals see the mountains so often they barely notice them anymore. But beneath that peaceful landscape lies a hidden geological threat capable of shutting down airports, collapsing infrastructure, contaminating water supplies, and throwing the entire region into chaos. The most disturbing part is not that these volcanoes exist. It is that almost nobody talks about them. While Vancouver prepares for earthquakes and climate disasters, another danger has been sitting silently in the shadows for centuries, watching, building pressure, and waiting for the moment the silence finally breaks. For decades, people across British Columbia have been taught to fear one disaster above all others, the massive earthquake known simply as the Big One. Emergency plans focus on collapsing highways, shaking buildings, and tsunami warnings along the Pacific coast. But while millions keep their eyes on the ground beneath their feet, very few ever look toward the mountains towering above the skyline. Just southeast of Vancouver stands Mount Baker, a snow-covered giant that appears calm, frozen, and timeless. Yet scientists classify it as one of the highest threat volcanoes in the United States. And despite being located across the border in Washington state, it sits close enough to place the entire Vancouver region within reach of its impact. What makes this threat so unsettling is how ordinary the mountain looks. There are no rivers of lava, no smoke filling the sky, just silence. But hidden beneath that silence is an active volcanic system, connected to the same geological forces that created some of North America's most destructive eruptions. Before we continue, take 1 second to subscribe and join us for more hidden disaster stories most people never hear about. The terrifying thing about Mount Baker is that the greatest danger would not come from rivers of lava flowing toward Vancouver. The city is too far away for that kind of Hollywood disaster. The real threat is far quieter, far darker, and far more realistic: volcanic ash. If Mount Baker were to erupt, scientists believe a massive plume of ash, rock, and superheated debris could rise tens of thousands of feet into the atmosphere within hours. And depending on wind conditions, that ash cloud could drift directly toward Metro Vancouver. Imagine looking up and watching the bright afternoon sky slowly disappear behind a wall of grey. At first, it would seem like heavy smoke. Then tiny particles would begin falling from the sky like dirty snow. But this is not ordinary dust. Under a microscope, volcanic ash is made of razor-sharp fragments of rock and volcanic glass. It cuts, scratches, and destroys almost everything it touches. The moment that ash reaches Vancouver, normal life would begin collapsing almost immediately. Flights would stop. Roads would become dangerous. Visibility would disappear beneath a dark haze hanging over the city. And for millions of people breathing the air, every breath could begin carrying microscopic shards deep into their lungs. What makes the scenario so unsettling is how quickly it could happen. One distant eruption could transform an entire modern city in less than a single day. But the ash itself would only be the beginning. The real danger comes from what happens after it starts falling across the city. Modern Vancouver depends on fragile interconnected systems that were never designed for a volcanic disaster. As the layer of ash thickens, the first major shock would likely hit transportation. Its Vancouver International Airport could shut down almost instantly as volcanic particles threatened to destroy jet engines in midair. Thousands of travelers would be stranded, while supply chains across the region begin breaking apart. Then the pressure will move into the city itself. Wet volcanic ash is incredibly heavy, sometimes weighing as much as concrete once mixed with rain. Flat rooftops across commercial buildings, warehouses, and older residential areas could begin collapsing under the sudden load. At the same time, the electrical grid would face another invisible threat. Volcanic ash conducts electricity when damp, meaning transformers and power lines could begin short-circuiting across the lower mainland. Entire neighborhoods might lose power for days while emergency crews struggle to work through hazardous conditions. Even Vancouver's famous drinking water would no longer be safe. Ash settling into reservoirs could contaminate the supply with acidic compounds and microscopic debris, forcing millions under emergency water advisories. And while the city struggles to keep its infrastructure alive, its hospitals would begin filling with people suffering breathing problems as fine volcanic particles spread through the air. The frightening part is how quickly a beautiful modern city could begin unraveling once the fallout truly begins. While most attention remains focused on Mount Baker to the south, some scientists believe the more dangerous long-term threat may actually be hidden inside Canada itself. Stretching north from Squamish is a little-known chain of volcanoes called the Garibaldi Volcanic Belt, part of the same powerful geological system connected to Mounts Helens and the Cascadia subduction zone. And among all of them, one mountain stands out for a disturbing reason: Mount Meager. At first glance, the remote volcanic massif looks cold, isolated, and lifeless. But beneath its glaciers and fractured rock lies one of the most active volcanic systems in Canada. Around 400 years ago, Mount Meager violently erupted with the same explosive force as the 1980 Mount Helens disaster. A massive column of ash blasted high into the atmosphere while volcanic debris spread across huge areas of Western Canada. Evidence of that eruption has even been discovered hundreds of kilometers away in Alberta. This was not a small local event. It was a continental-scale eruption powerful enough to permanently scar the landscape. But what makes Mount Meager especially terrifying is that the mountain already shows signs of instability even without erupting. In 2010, an enormous section of the mountainside suddenly collapsed without warning, sending tens of millions of cubic meters of rock crashing into the valley below. Scientists were stunned by the scale of the landslide, and that event happened without magma ever reaching the surface. Now imagine the same unstable mountain during a real volcanic awakening. If rising magma were to interact with the glacier covering the volcano, it could unleash catastrophic floods, landslides, and debris flows racing through nearby valleys at incredible speed. The mountain does not need lava flowing down its slopes to become deadly. Its instability alone may already be enough to trigger disaster. Even closer to Vancouver lies another volcanic danger that feels almost impossible to believe because of how beautiful it looks. Near the town of Squamish stands Mount Garibaldi, one of the most iconic peaks in British Columbia. Thousands of hikers and tourists visit the area every year, drawn to its turquoise waters, snowy ridges, and breathtaking alpine scenery. But hidden high in those mountains is a geological structure that scientists have quietly worried about for decades. Behind a fragile natural lava barrier sits Garibaldi Lake, holding back an enormous volume of water deep within the valley system. The lake itself only exists because ancient lava flows from Mount Garibaldi blocked its natural drainage thousands of years ago. Over time, that hardened lava became a massive wall known simply as the barrier. From a distance, it appears solid and permanent. In reality, it is fractured volcanic rock constantly leaking water through cracks and weak points. Geologists have long warned that the structure is inherently unstable. The terrifying scenario is not a giant volcanic eruption, but a sudden collapse of the barrier itself. If a major Cascadia earthquake were to shake the region, or even minor volcanic activity destabilize the mountain, the natural dam could partially fail. And if that happened, more than a cubic kilometer of water could explode down the valley within minutes. Its entire sections of the Tseax River Valley would be overwhelmed by a violent debris flow carrying water, mud rock, and shattered trees at destructive speeds. Roads, bridges, and homes downstream could disappear beneath the flood. The threat is considered so serious that decades ago the provincial government officially declared areas below the barrier unsafe for permanent settlement. One of the most photographed landscapes in Canada may also be hiding one of its most dangerous geological time bombs. But perhaps the most chilling volcanic story in Canadian history did not come from a giant eruption or a collapsing mountain. It came from something invisible. Far to the north in the Nass River Valley of British Columbia lies a small volcano known as Tseax. Around the year 1700, the volcano erupted and forever changed the lives of the Niska, a people living nearby. For generations, oral histories spoke of a terrifying disaster, villages suddenly wiped out, people collapsing where they stood, and an unseen force moving silently through the valley during the night. At first, many believed the lava itself caused the destruction. But when scientists later studied the area, they discovered something far more disturbing. The lava flows had moved too slowly to explain the massive loss of life. Instead, researchers believe the eruption released enormous amounts of volcanic gases, especially carbon dioxide. Because CO is heavier than air, it would have flowed downhill like an invisible river, filling the valley floor and pushing oxygen out of the air. Thousands of people may have suffocated without ever understanding what was happening around them. There were no explosions tearing apart buildings, no towering walls of lava chasing victims through the forest. Just silence, darkness, and air that suddenly could no longer support life. It remains one of the deadliest volcanic disasters in Canadian history, and one of the least known. After hearing about ash clouds, collapsing mountains, flood disasters, and invisible volcanic gases, one question becomes impossible to ignore. Who is actually watching these volcanoes today? The answer is what shocks many scientists the most. Despite sitting on the Pacific Ring of Fire, Canada remains the only G7 nation without a dedicated national volcano observatory. While countries like the United States and Japan heavily monitor volcanic systems with dense networks of sensors, cameras, GPS stations, and gas detectors, much of Western Canada is still monitored with surprisingly limited equipment. Some volcanologists have openly warned that the country is, in many ways, flying blind. That phrase alone is deeply unsettling. Because volcanoes rarely erupt without warning signs. The ground usually begins trembling. Gas emissions change. Heat rises beneath the surface. But detecting those subtle signals requires modern monitoring systems placed close to dangerous volcanic zones. In large parts of British Columbia, those systems simply do not exist at the level experts believe they should. And that creates the real fear. The danger is not only the eruption itself, but the possibility of recognizing the warning signs too late. Instead of months to prepare, entire communities might only have days or even hours before a disaster begins unfolding. In a region filled with hidden geological threats, silence may not mean safety at all. For now, Vancouver still looks calm. The mountains remain silent, the lakes peaceful, and daily life continues beneath one of the most beautiful skylines in the world. But history has shown that volcanic threats do not disappear simply because people stop paying attention to them. Hidden beneath the glaciers, forests, and rocky peaks of Western Canada is a geological system that is still alive. Scientists know it, the landscape remembers it, and one day, that silence could break again. The next disaster near Vancouver may not begin with collapsing buildings or giant waves crashing onto the shore. It could begin with ash drifting through the sky, unstable mountains giving way, or floodwaters racing down a valley without warning. The threat is not gone. It is simply waiting. And the question is whether the region will recognize the danger before it is too late. Subscribe now and stay with us for more hidden disaster stories, extreme weather investigations, and underreported global threats every week.